On March the 2nd, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted a resolution demanding that Russia immediately end its military operation in Ukraine. The majority of members voted in favor, while 35 abstained. On the 24th of March, a similar resolution was passed. This time, 38 countries abstained. Who are these countries that abstained, and what is their reasoning? Jonathan Heckenbroch, a fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, has a geo-economic explanation. He says that if the global community becomes more polarized, developed economies might choose to trade more with their neighbors and those who share similar values. Developing economies in, for example, Africa would likely want to hedge their bets by abstaining from the UN resolution, as that might lead to more economic decoupling in the world. That could be a reason why you see many names of African countries in the abstention list. China was one of the countries that abstained both times. Its officials called for diplomacy and said hardline condemnations could lead to more unilateral sanctions that make problems worse instead of solving them.
联合国190多个成员国当中，有140多个国家没有参与对俄制裁，这表明世界上绝大多数国家都是以审慎和负责任的态度对待制裁问题的。
In a comprehensive study on sanctions over the past century, researchers concluded that they were partially successful only 34% of the time. Of course, there was one notable case where sanctions may have contributed to a positive result. Nelson Mandela said there was no doubt that trade embargoes in the 1980s accelerated the end of apartheid in South Africa. But then there is the devastating side of those sanctions that didn't work. For example, the UN and the Cuban government estimated that sanctions have cost the Cuban economy $130 billion over 6 decades. The Venezuelan economy only recorded its first growth last year since a decade of economic collapse. The West's sanctions against these countries did very little to achieve any objective, let alone regime change. Why don't sanctions work? There are a few reasons. First, while many sanctions are said to be targeting governments, it's usually the general population who feel the pain, especially the poorer demographics. Second, as developed countries have much more economic leverage, sanctions from these countries, mostly Western, could be seen as expressions of Western bullying, encouraging more support in the targeted countries for their governments, making their domestic political positions stronger instead of weaker. Third, not all countries agree on sanctions. The longer unilateral sanctions last, the more likely that sanctioned countries will find ways to work around them by finding alternative partners. With so little success and so high a cost, China insists its claim that sanctions are more often than not a recipe for disaster and not a solution to the world's problems.